The moment my manager slid the folder across the desk toward me, I already knew it wasn't the folder itself. It was the way she kept her eyes on the table, the way HR sat beside her like a piece of furniture that had learned to nod. 12 years. I'd given that company 12 years, and they handed me a separation agreement with a sticky note on top that said, "Please review at your convenience," like I was returning a library book. I sat in my car for 45 minutes afterward. Didn't cry. Just stared at the steering wheel and thought about how I'd skipped my cousin's wedding last spring because of a deadline that no longer mattered to anyone. My name is Jenna. I'm 31, a former financial analyst for a logistics firm in Columbus, Ohio, where the winters are gray and the office buildings look exactly the same from the outside, no matter what's happening inside. I was good at my job. I was always early, always the one who stayed to finish what someone else had started. My performance reviews used words like dependable and detail-oriented and a stabilizing presence on the team, which sounds like a compliment until you realize it means you're the kind of person people lean on until they don't need you anymore. I drove home and sat at my kitchen table and called my mom. She picked up on the second ring, which meant she wasn't busy, which meant this was going to be a real conversation. "I lost my job today," I said. There was a pause. Not the pause of someone choosing words carefully. The pause of someone rearranging the next 20 minutes of their afternoon. "Oh, honey," she said. "How?" "Company restructuring. The whole analytics department." "Well," her voice shifted into something practical, something efficient, the tone she used when she was problem-solving someone else's crisis on the way to doing something she'd already planned. "That's a lot of people then, not just you." "I know. So it's not personal." I pressed my thumb into a scratch on the table. "No," I said, "just economics." She exhaled. "You'll be fine. You always land on your feet. Listen, I'm actually in the middle of something with your brother right now. He's got that showcase on Saturday and the venue changed last minute. There's a whole logistical mess." "Right," I said. "I'll call you tomorrow, okay? We can talk through your resume, think about next steps." "Sure, love you." She hung up before I finished saying it back. I sat with the phone face down on the table for a long time. Outside, a neighbor was pulling a trash can back up her driveway. I watched her through the window. She waved when she noticed me. I raised a hand I barely felt. My brother's name is Declan, and he's 27, and he makes music. Not the kind with streaming numbers or label deals, the kind with moody SoundCloud pages and a devoted following of roughly 300 people, most of whom he knows personally. My parents talk about his talent the way people talk about a sleeping volcano, with a reverence that assumes eruption is simply a matter of time. He's been 4 years away from his breakthrough since he was 19. I love Declan the way you love someone who has always cost you something. It started when I was 22 and fresh out of Ohio State and feeling briefly like the ground beneath me was solid. My parents asked if I could help with his first studio session. "Just this one. It's important." I said yes because I was young and because I still believed in the arithmetic of family, that what you give comes back to you in a different form. That was 9 years ago. Since then, I have paid for studio time, a new laptop because his old one crashed, and he lost 3 months of tracks, a lease deposit when his roommate situation collapsed, a plane ticket to Los Angeles that was supposed to be a one-way trip toward something better and turned out to be a round trip home 4 months later, and more just until I get paid transfers than I could count even if I tried, which I eventually did because I needed the number for my own sanity. $43,000, give or take. My parents contributed encouragement and a car once when the one they gave him needed more in repairs than it was worth. But that was different. That was a gift, my mother said, because they were his parents. What I gave was also a gift, but somehow the accounting worked differently. The day after I was laid off, I called my dad. He picked up the way he always does, already mid-sentence, already talking to someone else, the phone arriving at his ear like an afterthought. "Hey, hold on." I held on. "Sorry," he said. "Back? What's up?" "I wanted to give you a heads up about the layoff. I'm going to need to cut back on what I've been sending Declan every month. A beat." "How much cutback?" "All of it," I said. "For now." He was quiet for a moment in a way that had texture to it. Careful quiet. He's got the showcase Saturday, he said. He's counting on you for the sound equipment rental. I know, I'll let him know directly. Jenna? He said my name like it was a word I'd misspelled. He needs that equipment. Dad, I need a job. Another silence. Then you'll find something. You're good at this stuff. This stuff was a phrase he used for everything I did that he didn't fully understand, which was most of it. I said goodbye and didn't tell him about the folder or the HR person or the 45 minutes in the parking lot. Some details feel like gifts you give people, and I'd stopped gifting those to him a while back. Declan called at 9 that night. He opened with, "So Mom told me," and we both already knew how the conversation was going to land. I explained it calmly. Laid off. Department eliminated. No severance worth mentioning, a month of copper to figure out, savings that would last maybe 5 months if I was careful, and 6 if I was strategic. I can't do the equipment rental right now, I said. I'm sorry. He was quiet, which with Declan means he's building towards something. I've been planning this showcase for 3 months. I know. I told the venue I had it covered. I understand. I can't right now. His voice went flat in the way it does when he's trying to sound hurt instead of angry, and the effort is visible. You said you'd help? I said I would help when I had the money. I don't have the money. Can't you put it on a card? I stared at the ceiling in my bedroom. I can't put it on a card. It's $300, Jenna. I know exactly what it is. He made a sound, not quite a sigh, more like a release of pressure. Fine. I'll figure it out. He hung up, and I lay there and stared at the ceiling until the shadows from the streetlight outside moved enough that I could tell an hour had passed. The next morning, my mother texted. Declan says, "You're not helping with the showcase. Can we talk?" I put my phone face down and made coffee and sat with it for a while. 3 days went by. My brother texted once to say he'd found someone else to cover the equipment. No context, no punctuation, a small missile designed to inform me that I had been replaced as a resource and that the replacement was noted. My father didn't call. My mother called once, and we talked for 14 minutes about my resume and the job market and how networking is really the key, and had I considered reaching out to people on LinkedIn, and she did not once ask how I was sleeping, which was badly, or eating, which was barely, or what the inside of my apartment felt like during the day, now that I had no reason to leave it, which was like a room that had forgotten its purpose. On the 5th day, I got an email. The sender name said Westbrook A, and the subject line said I heard through a mutual friend. Hoping this finds you okay. I almost deleted it. I get those sometimes, career coaches, people selling resume packages, well-meaning spam, but something in the phrasing made me pause. I heard through a mutual friend, not I came across your profile, not I specialize in career transitions. I opened it. Jenna. My name is Archer Westbrook. I don't know if your mother ever mentioned me. We knew each other a long time ago before you were born. I'm a friend of your father's family, or I was before things changed. I've been following your work at the firm from a distance, through public channels, because you've done impressive things and I wanted to keep track. I heard this week that you were laid off. I'm sorry. That was a genuinely good team, and what happened wasn't a reflection of your abilities. I don't want to intrude. I just wanted you to know that if you ever need anything, a reference, a conversation, a connection somewhere, I'm here. No obligation, no strings. Just an offer. I read it 3 times. The name Archer Westbrook did not appear anywhere in my memory with any clarity, which was strange because I have a good memory. Names stick to me. I remember my 2nd grade teacher's substitute. I remember the name of the woman my father carpooled with when I was 8. I had never heard the name Archer Westbrook. I wrote back, "Thank you for reaching out. I appreciate the kindness. Can I ask how you know my family?" He replied within an hour. I was close to your father's side for many years. We had a falling out that was more complicated than I can summarize in an email. I'd prefer to leave the details there unless you want to know more. I understand if this feels strange. It felt extremely strange, but it also felt like the only thing in a week that hadn't been transactional. I wrote back, "It does feel strange. I'm okay with strange right now." 3 weeks passed. Declan's showcase happened without me. My mother sent a photo. He was standing in front of a dim-lit room holding a microphone and smiling the specific smile he uses in photos, wide and practiced and aimed somewhere above the camera. My dad commented a row of clapping emojis. I double-tapped the photo and put my phone down and went back to the spreadsheet I'd been building to track every dollar going in and out of my life, which was a more useful exercise than it should have been. He was careful, never pushing, always leaving the door open and standing at a respectful distance from it. He told me about his work, landscape architecture, which I hadn't expected. Something about the precision of it appealed to me because I understood precision. He asked about mine. He was genuinely curious about financial analysis in a way that made me talk longer than I intended to. One evening I asked directly, "Did you know my dad well?" He replied, "I knew your father's whole family. I was at your grandparents' house more times than I can count. I knew your dad before he became the version of himself that he is now," which sounds critical but isn't meant to be. People change. Circumstances change what people think they're allowed to feel. I sat with that for a long time. What changed? I wrote. A longer pause than usual. Then, that's something I'd rather explain in person if you're ever open to it. I know that sounds evasive. I don't mean it to be. Some things are just easier to say out loud. I had no reason to say yes. He was a stranger who'd appeared in my inbox during the lowest week of my recent memory, connected to a part of my family I didn't have full information about, offering things I didn't fully understand yet. I said yes anyway. We met at a coffee place near downtown, one of those places with exposed brick and mismatched chairs and coffee that costs more than it should and tastes exactly like it should. He was already there when I arrived, sitting by the window, older than I'd pictured. Somewhere in his late 50s, with the kind of face that suggests it has done a lot of weather. He stood when he saw me and I noticed he was nervous, which was not what I'd expected, and something about his nervousness made me less nervous. He said my name when I sat down and it came out with a weight to it, like he'd been practicing how to say it for a long time. We talked for almost 2 hours. He told me about my grandfather, my father's father, who apparently had a sense of humor that nobody in my immediate family had ever mentioned, and a habit of building birdhouses in his garage that he gave to neighbors he liked. I had not known this. I was told my grandfather was a quiet man. I was not told he was a generous one. He told me about the falling out. It was money. It was always money. A loan my grandfather had needed and Archer had given and my father had resented for reasons that made a certain kind of complicated sense, the way family resentments do, where the surface reason is one thing and the real reason is something older and harder to name. I asked how he knew I'd been laid off. He smiled, careful and small. "You have a former colleague named Britt. She and I worked on a project once, years back." She mentioned it in passing. She didn't know the connection between us. "I almost wasn't going to reach out," he said. "I wasn't sure it was my place." "What made you do it?" He looked at the table for a moment. He had a coffee he'd barely touched. "Because you were alone with it. I could tell from the way she described it that you were handling it by yourself and that the people who should have shown up probably weren't going to." I looked out the window at the street. A woman was walking a dog that was way too large for the sidewalk and navigating it with cheerful incompetence. I watched them for a second. "They weren't," I said. He nodded. "I know, there's something clarifying about being seen accurately by someone who has no reason to lie to you. I found a job 6 weeks after the layoff. A smaller firm, a better team, a title that was technically a step down on paper and felt in practice like a step sideways into something that fit better. I told my parents the same day. My mother said wonderful and asked if the benefits were good. My father said great, good for you, and mentioned that Declan was in talks with a local venue about a residency, just in case I wanted to know. Archer texted that evening. "Just heard from Britain. Congratulations." And then, "You earned it." I stared at that for longer than made sense. "You earned it." 4 words from someone who had watched me from a distance through professional channels for years, and they landed differently than anything my parents had said about any job I'd ever gotten. It took me 2 more months to ask him directly. We were at the same coffee place, which had become a habit by then, every few weeks, which should have felt strange but didn't anymore. I'd stopped wondering about it and started being grateful for it, the way you eventually stop questioning why a window in your apartment lets in particularly good light and start just sitting near it. I waited until we'd been talking for a while, until the conversation had settled into its comfortable gear, and then I said it. Are you my biological father? He set his cup down. He didn't say no immediately. He didn't look surprised either, which told me something. What made you ask? He said, which also told me something. I've been thinking about it for a while, I said. The way you talk about my family, the way you appeared, the way you said I should have been here sooner in that third email and then never explained what you meant. He was quiet for a moment. His hands were flat on the table. Your mother and I, he said slowly, were together before she was with your father, for about 2 years. It ended badly, not because of cruelty, but because of timing and because we both wanted different things, and then we both went and got them. I heard through the family grapevine years later that you'd been born, and I counted backward, and I had questions. But your mother had moved on. Your father was in the picture. It wasn't my place to disrupt anything. I stared at the brick wall across from me. There was a water stain, shaped vaguely like a continent. Did you ever ask her? I said. He exhaled slowly. Once, 8 years ago. She told me it wasn't relevant. The word relevant sat in my chest like a small, cold stone. Did you believe her? He looked at me steadily. No. I thought about the way my father looked at me sometimes, like he was calculating something he'd never quite worked out. I thought about how my mother changed the subject whenever I talked about traits I had that didn't match anyone in the room. I thought about my grandfather's birdhouses and my strange talent for spatial reasoning and the way I've always been more comfortable with precision than with feeling, which is apparently a thing Archer is also known for, according to his former colleague, Britton. I don't know what a DNA test will say, I told him. I haven't done one yet. He nodded. You don't have to. I know, but I want to. He looked at the table, then at me. Whatever it says, he said quietly. I'm not me, and more I want to be clear about that. This isn't conditional. And there it was. The thing I hadn't known I was waiting for. Not conditional. I thought about every transaction I'd made in my family, every deposit into an account that never paid interest, every approval I'd worked for and received briefly and had to re-earn the following month. I thought about the way love in my house always came with a next step, a request, a redirect towards someone else's need. I thought about sitting in my car in that parking lot after the layoff and calling my mother first. Because that's what you do. That's the order of operations. And the way she'd move the conversation to Declan's venue problem within 90 seconds. I thought about a man who'd found out a stranger had lost her job and written an email that asked for nothing. I didn't know a person could do that. I mean, I knew it theoretically. I had not experienced it from the direction of family. The DNA test came back on a Tuesday. I was eating cereal at my kitchen table when the notification came through. I put the bowl down. I opened the app. I sat very still. The number was not ambiguous. I called Archer. He picked up on the first ring, which meant he'd been waiting, which I already knew. I said the number out loud, even though we both already understood what it meant. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said, okay, just that. Just okay, like something that had been suspended for a long time had finally gently landed. I drove to my parents' house that evening. I hadn't told them I was coming, and their faces when they opened the door had different expressions. My mother's immediately cautious. My father's immediately resigned, like they'd both been waiting for this specific visit for longer than they'd admitted to each other or to themselves. I sat at their kitchen table, and I said it plainly. I know about Archer. I've met him. I've had a DNA test. My mother's jaw tightened. Where did you hear about him? He reached out, I said. After the layoff, her face did something complicated. You shouldn't have talked to him. I looked at her. I was laid off for 3 weeks before you asked how I was sleeping. She opened her mouth, closed it. My father stood at the counter with his arms crossed, which is his version of bracing. He's been out of our lives for 30 years, he said. He's been out of our lives, I said. He's been watching mine. That's not something to be proud of, my mother said sharply. That's strange behavior. He wrote me one email, I said. He didn't call. He didn't show up. He sent one email that said, "I heard you might be struggling. Let me know if I can help." No obligation. I've had job recruiters be more aggressive than that. My father's mouth tightened. "I didn't come here to fight," I said. "I came because you deserve to know I know, and because I'm not interested in pretending anymore." My mother's voice shifted, that private, sharp tone that has never once changed my mind about anything. "Jenna, you have a family, right here." I looked around the kitchen, at the photos on the refrigerator, Declan at every age, me in the background of most of them, slightly to the side, always slightly to the side. I calculated. I said, "I keep track of things. It's what I do." $43,000 over 9 years to Declan's career. 112 dinners I've shown up to when I didn't want to, 14 conversations where I said yes when I meant no, 6 times I missed something that mattered to me to make it to something that mattered to you. My mother's eyes went wet. "That's not fair." "And the week I lost my job," I said, "you called once, 14 minutes. The longest sentence you said about me was 'you'll land on your feet.' The second longest was about Declan's venue." Silence. "I'm not cutting you off," I said. "I'm not doing anything dramatic. I'm just telling you that I found something, a person who showed up in the worst week without being asked and without expecting anything back. And I'm going to keep that, and nothing you say is going to make me feel guilty for it." My father uncrossed his arms. "That's not family," he said. "That's a stranger who showed up at a convenient time." I stood up from the table. "A stranger who asked for nothing," I said, "is worth more than family who takes everything. Do the math. I'm good at math." I drove home with the windows down even though it was cold because I needed the air to be real against my face, because my hands were shaking and I wanted to feel something physical and grounding. And mine. That was 4 months ago. Declan hasn't called. My father texts occasionally, functional things, forwarded articles, the occasional one-line check-in that asks nothing and expects nothing and expects nothing. My mother and I have spoken twice. Careful conversations that move around the important things like furniture we've agreed not to rearrange. It's not warm. It's not what I used to wish for. But it's honest, which is a different kind of thing. Archer came to Columbus 2 weeks ago. We walked along a river path near Bicentennial Park where the trees were just starting to think about going green and the light was doing that thing it does in April, coming in sideways and making everything look less permanent than it is. He told me about the birdhouses. He'd helped my grandfather build them sometimes when he was younger. He said my grandfather had a rule, never give a birdhouse to someone who asked for one, only to people who never would. I thought about that for a long time as we walked. I am trying to learn to be a person who lets things in that I never would have thought to ask for. It's harder than it sounds. I'm trained for reciprocity, for ledgers, for making sure the outgoing matches the incoming. Letting someone simply exist in your corner without calculating what it costs or what it means or whether it will last is a skill I did not know I was missing until I needed it. We sat on a bench near the water and I didn't say much and neither did he. And it was fine. It was more than fine. The river moved. The trees stood there doing what trees do. A kid on a bike went past too fast and caught herself before she wiped out and laughed, loud and unself-conscious. I have been thinking about what family means for most of my adult life, usually while I was doing something for mine that I didn't particularly want to do. I thought it was people who shared your history. I thought it was obligation dressed up in the language of love. I thought it was the arithmetic of being owed something, of owedness stretching across generations like a lease that auto-renews. I don't think that anymore. Family is the person who found out you were struggling through mutual acquaintance and sat with the decision to reach out or stay quiet and chose, carefully and without guarantee, to reach out anyway. Family is the person who sat outside your hardest week and asked for nothing and left the door open and waited. I have one of those now. Turns out that's enough. Turns out that's more than I ever had before. I used to think I was bad at asking for help because I was independent. I know now that's not what it was. I was bad at asking for help because I'd learned, slowly and thoroughly, that asking meant owing, and owing meant the terms were never in my favor. That's not independence. That's a survival strategy that costs you everything quietly over years. in increments small enough that you don't notice until you're sitting in a parking lot after losing your job and the first person you think to call is your mother, and the call lasts 14 minutes and ends with a segue to your brother's venue problem. What I did for my family for 9 years wasn't love exactly. It was a performance of love that I'd been cast in before I understood the role. The casting happened early, the way it always does in families like mine. The moment someone decides which child is capable and which child is precious, and the capable one gets handed responsibility like a compliment, like it's a gift, until the weight of it becomes so familiar that you stop noticing you're the only one carrying it. Declan didn't become who he is because my parents were cruel. They became who they are because nobody ever made them account for the math. I kept the ledger quiet. I told myself it was generosity. What I was actually doing was enabling a dynamic that only worked because I refused to let it break. The cause of my exhaustion wasn't my job or the layoff or the economy. It was 9 years of choosing other people's comfort over my own basic needs and calling that love and wondering why I felt so empty at the end of every month. Archer didn't save me. I want to be clear about that because it would be easy to tell the story that way, the stranger who appeared and fixed everything. That's not what happened. What happened is that he asked for nothing, and in asking for nothing, he showed me what it felt like to be in a relationship with no extraction in it, no terms, no next request waiting behind the current one. That contrast did the work. I did the rest. The moral I kept trying to find in my family's behavior for years is that they didn't love me enough. I don't think that's accurate anymore. I think they loved me in the only way they knew, which was instrumentally, which was conditionally, which was a version of love that functions more like a supply chain than a feeling. You don't fix that by confronting it or proving your worth or cutting off the autopay in a dramatic gesture in your mother's kitchen, though I'll admit that last one felt satisfying in a way I don't regret. You fix it by learning to recognize what real steadiness feels like and refusing to accept less. That recognition is slow. It doesn't arrive as a revelation. It arrives the way April light does, sideways, making everything look slightly different than it did before, and you sit with it long enough that eventually you can't go back to seeing it the old way. I earned the job I found. I earned the peace I'm building. And I earned it not because I worked hard enough or suffered enough or finally got something the universe owed me, but because I stopped pouring everything into a system that was never going to return it, and I turned towards something that would. That's the only arithmetic that ever actually balances.